Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the February 6th, 2024 meeting of the Milford Planning and Zoning Board. If we'd please stand for the pledge and a moment of silence. Megan, if you would please call the roll.
Mr. Zaharides is excused. Mr. Agnesi?
Present.
Mr. Alling?
Present.
Mr. Anderson?
Present.
Mr. Hirsch?
Here.
Mr. Collegian?
Present.
Mr. Macchio?
Here.
Mr. Mortimer?
Present.
Mr. Sadi?
Present.
And Chairman Quish.
Also present. First order of business is our capital improvement plan 2023 to 2028. Approval pursuant to CGS section 8-24 to approve the 5-year capital improvement plan for the years 23 to 28.
Good evening. Good evening, Chairman Quish and members of the Planning and Zoning Board. Before you this evening is the City of Milford Capital Improvement Plan for 2023 to 2028. The city's capital improvement plan is an important planning tool that outlines the capital needs of the City of Milford over the next 5 years. Please note, this is a planning document and it does not commit the City of Milford to any funding, nor does it suggest that any one of these proposals has priority over another. An important part of having a capital improvement plan is allowing the City of Milford eligibility for additional state and federal grants. Some grants require a project to be on a city's capital improvement plan for funding eligibility. The city has a strong track record of securing grants and utilizing non-city funds for projects, and it is my hope we'll be able to fund some of these infrastructure improvements throughout the life of this document. A majority of the capital improvement plan focuses on improving our aging infrastructure, making strategic investments in the future, and ensuring repairs and upgrades to City of Milford sidewalks, streets, and recreational assets. I respectfully request your prompt approval for this plan in accordance with Connecticut General Statute CGS 8-24. Thank you for your consideration, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments for the mayor? Mr. Anderson.
For you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mayor Giannatasio. Thanks for coming. For the sake of the public and their knowledge, it is a planning document. It's a 5-year planning document. There are a number of things that are to be considered in year 1. I wondered if you had given thought about what might be your priorities that you plan on submitting to the Board of Aldermen next month.
I'm actually, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Commissioner Anderson. Yes, we are considering certain projects, storm resiliency projects, to improve upon flooding in low areas. So that's always a big priority, being a shoreline community. That's a top priority.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And then question for you or David, because I don't recall, having served with you on the Board of Aldermen, I don't recall what happens if a priority 1 item gets passed over. Does it go to the bottom of the list and it then becomes a year 5? I don't recall offhand. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I just had a question. I have a couple. One is that, forgive me, on page 2 and 144, where it lists for the police department, the capital expense is given as 7.7 million, but then on page 145, the cost of the new facility that would be built is given as 77 million. I just wanted to make sure that could be corrected whichever way it should be.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Commissioner Alling, the question is, or the answer is, I should say, the 77 million. I think it's prudent if you're going to, with the capital improvement plan that's before you, to have realistic market value costs in construction. So the answer would be the 77 million is the correct number.
Okay, thank you. I just would like that to be reflected on page 2 so that people who are maybe not approaching it with as much enthusiasm to read all the way to page 145 would see the cost. And then on the proposed Health and Human Services building project, is there a planned location for that or proposed?
Actually, there's 4 options that we're looking at, and we're looking at the most cost-effective way to approach it and the most user-friendly way. We want to make sure that it's accessible to the community and it's centrally located.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for the mayor? Seeing none, I'd hear a motion. Mr. Sadi?
Thank you, Chairman Quish. I move to approve as presented pursuant to CGS Section 8-24, the City of Milford 5-year capital improvement plan for 2023 to 2028.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion? Seeing none, Meg, if you would call the roll.
Mr. Agnesi,
With the motion.
Mr. Alling,
With the motion.
Mr. Anderson,
With the motion.
Mr. Hirsch,
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian,
With the motion.
Mr. Machio,
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer,
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi,
With the motion,
and Chairman Quish.
I'm also with the motion. Thank you. Next order of business is 16 Hanover Street, Zone R5, petition of Thomas Lynch Esquire for coastal site plan review to construct a single-family dwelling on MOP 22, Block 458, Parcel 6, of which Kenneth Esposito Jr. is the owner. I do want to acknowledge that I do know the applicant, and I have no interest in the project, and I won't be swayed either way.
So noted. Thank
Just
you.
have to say it.
So noted. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening. For the record, my name is Thomas Lynch. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Lynch, Trimbicki, and Boynton, and my office is located here in Milford at 63 Cherry Street. And I'm here tonight with my client and also friend, Ken Esposito. Ken has lived here in Milford his whole life. He's built a number of homes in the Laurel Beach, Wildermere Beach, Walnut Beach area over the years. And we're before you tonight with an application for coastal area management site plan approval for the construction of this home at 16 Hanover Street. So this is actually the 3rd step in the approval process that we've had to go through. The lot was certified by Stephen Harris back in 2021 as a legal non-conforming lot under the prior Section 642 of our zoning regulations. After that certification was issued, I appeared before the Zoning Board of Appeals representing Ken for a variance under Section 641 of our 3141 of our regulations for a side yard variance to allow, instead of having the required 10 feet on one side and 5 on the other side, a variance, so there was a 5-yard setback on each side of the house. It's a very small, narrow, 30-foot wide house in the R5 zone. It consists of some 2,500 square feet. So the Board of Appeals granted the variance to allow this building plan to move forward. So now, with this 3rd step, we're before you for the CAM approval. David has put on the website the site plan that was put together by Paul Stoll, and the plans are also on the website. It's a 47 by 20 foot house, It has 2 levels of living space totaling 1,880 square feet. It's the typical 3-level home that you see built along the shoreline now, with the garage, with the breakaway walls on the first level, and then 2 levels of improved living space above. The first level having the living room, dining area, and kitchen, and the second living space level having 4 bedrooms. There's a master suite with 3 smaller bedrooms, and then an unfinished attic on the 3rd floor. The plans have been reviewed by Stephen Harris and David Sulkus. Stephen's memo to you indicates that the plan is zoning compliant, especially with the variances that were granted. Stephen had one comment relative to the location of the electric meter, and that's been placed on the deck leading from the stairs from the first level, so that satisfied his requirements. The plan was also reviewed by Greg Podleski, the city engineer. There were a few technical comments that he made, and he noted in his report that he had no problem with the plan being approved, subject to the condition that those items A through E in his report be addressed. One of them was he wanted a stormwater runoff calculation to be performed by a licensed engineer. Paul Stoll is not a licensed engineer. He's retained the services of an outside engineer, and we should have that and will have that prior to seeking building permits. So other than that, the property is located in flood zone AE. The house is compliant with all the AE requirements, with the first level of living space at 13 feet, and the house is 35 feet in height, again, zoning compliant. So that's a pretty straightforward application we're presenting to you. Happy to answer any questions. If I can't answer them, Ken is here with me, but we'd ask that you act on this tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. David, is there anything you feel compelled to contribute?
Not really, but I'll read my report anyway. The applicant is proposing to construct a new single-family dwelling in an AE 11 flood zone. No adverse impacts to the coastal resources are expected, but the applicant is still updating information requested by the city engineer. The proposed dwelling is substantially zoning compliant.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, one additional comment is, in the city engineer's report, he noted that there is not a sufficient city right-of-way in front of the property to allow for sidewalks, so he did make a point in his report that sidewalks, even though they're noted on the plan, they are not required as they usually are with new construction. So I'm just adding that for the record.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none?
Thank you. I'm sorry it's so close. Good evening, Attorney Lynch.
Good evening, Bob.
I appreciate the history, but could you just relate again? You started off saying it was legal non-conforming, it wasn't, and you could just read 6.642, is that what we had taken out?
Yes.
Okay.
So prior to the moratorium that went into effect and then ultimately the change to the regulation that removed that regulation, this lot was certified as a legal non-conforming lot. The property at 14 Hanover Street included this side lot, so we received certification for both of those lots as legal building lots.
And then you indicated that you had to go before the Zoning Board of Appeals. I'm assuming that's because you have 5 foot between the building and the end of the side lots?
Yes, we have two 5-foot setbacks on either side of the house.
What
And in
was-
that zone, it requires 10 on one side and 5 on the other.
And the last hearing getting into, you start talking about the sidewalks. So we're not going to be talking about the sidewalks in a motion?
Correct. And that was noted in the city engineer's report. So the one thing that I recommended to you, that a motion to approve be including language that it's conditional upon the city engineer's requirements set forth in his January 10th memo be part of the condition of approval, or be made a condition of approval.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Nothing further, Mr. Chair.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yep, John?
Good evening, Attorney Lynch.
Hi, John.
I'm just looking at your the proposed conditions of approval, letter A, having to do with the center line of the garage not reaching the minimum 18-inch.
Correct.
Could you explain that a little bit, because I'm not sure of
With
what that actually
elevations,
means?
you have to have, and again, this is all relative to the flood area. So elevations have to be at certain levels off the mean. So what Greg was saying in that comment, and I'll read it for the record, he said the elevation of the garage floor is only 0.2 feet or 2.5 inches higher than the centerline grade of the road at the subject site. The engineering department guidelines require that the garage floor be a minimum of 18 feet above the centerline grade. The owner could prepare a waiver stating the understanding that they do not meet the requirement and relieve the city of responsibilities relative to such deviations. So if there's ponding or water that gathers on the lot, the builder signs a waiver saying the city has no responsibility for that.
I see. So are you going to attempt to
Yes.
attain a waiver? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. And there's no sidewalks, but you're going to put curbs?
There'll be an apron with curbing,
An
correct?
apron curb. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, I'd hear a motion.
Okay. Should I read this motion with all the? Yeah? Okay. I move to present with the following modifications, the petition of Thomas Lynch Esquire for a coastal site plan review to construct a single-family dwelling on map 22, block 458, parcel 6, of which Kenneth Esposito Jr. is the owner. Simple majority is required to pass. Proposed conditions of approval. The applicant shall comply with the following items, recommendations contained in the city engineer's report dated 1/10/24. A, the applicant represents that the garage floor cannot be placed at an elevation a minimum of 18 inches above the center line grade. If the minimum 18-inch cannot be achieved, a waiver acknowledging that they are aware that the garage elevation does not meet the minimum standards of the engineering department shall be presented. B, calculations and design of stormwater mitigation prepared by a Connecticut licensed professional engineer may be deferred until prior to issuance of a building permit, subject to the limitations as described in item 1 herein above. C, plans are to be revised to indicate the sanitary sewer lateral. D, CAM application is to be revised as described in item Q herein above, i.e. provide stormwater mitigation prepared by a Connecticut licensed professional engineer, found to be satisfactory by the Milford City Engineer. And provision E, the applicant may elect to remove the proposed sidewalk from the proposal without further review by this department. However, any such intent to remove such sidewalks is to be made clear prior to the approval of any application, i.e. if the sidewalks are included in any approval which may be granted, they shall become integral to said approval and must be built.
Thank you. We have a motion, and do we have a second?
I second the motion.
Thank you. Any further discussion of the motion? Seeing none, Meg, if you would please call the roll.
Mr. Agnesi,
With the motion.
Mr. Ulling,
With the motion.
Mr. Anderson,
With the motion.
Mr. Hirsch,
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian,
With the motion.
Mr. Machio,
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer,
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi,
With the motion.
and Chairman Quish.
I'm with the motion also. Good luck.
All right, thanks so much.
Next order of business is 187-189 Hillside, Zone R5 petition of Kevin Crusadien Esquire for a coastal site plan review to construct/renovate an existing two-family dwelling at map 59, block 795, parcel 69, of which Sachin Anand is the owner. Applicant has the floor.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, my name is Kevin Crusadien with Crusadien & Moore. My office is at 3 Lafayette Street here in Milford. Welcome to the new members of the board and some of the returning members from the past. This is an application. This is not a build from scratch. This is a 1,000 square foot addition on an existing two-family structure. The structure has existed as a two-family structure since at least the early 1900s. it up. Thank you. The zoning enforcement officer has reviewed the plans and determined them to be zoning compliant. Similar to the previous CAM application, the city engineer has reviewed the plans. He has some conditions of approval that we understand and agree to. This is not a project that is requires inland wetlands approval, but they reviewed it and signed off on it. My client is with me tonight, Mr. Anand. He's built several houses in Milford and several within the coastal site plan area and had previous approvals on these. The house, the structure's zoning compliant. It is FEMA compliant, and it is once the addition, if approved, is built, it'll go from about 2,000 square feet to about 2,900, 3,000 square feet. So pending your questions, that's the extent of the application.
Thank you. David, would you like to speak to this?
The application is for a renovation with expansion of an existing two-story, two-family dwelling. As a two-family dwelling, it is not exempt from CAM review per section 5.12.2. No adverse impacts to coastal resources are anticipated with the proposed work. Multiple conditions of approval from the city engineer's report dated 1/31/24 are recommended.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board? Mr. Sadi.
Thank you. Good evening, Attorney Crusaden.
Good evening.
Looking at the plans, the lot itself is very unique. Doesn't have a lot of parameters that are even lines, but
Right.
so it's hard to see. But you've complied with all the setback and side yard requirements. Looks like you have plenty of space to do that.
Correct. The project did not require any variances. It's an existing structure with a proposed addition that will comply with the setbacks without a variance required.
And did I hear you say that you added, I think you said 1,000 feet to the size of the building that was there?
The proposed addition is about 1,000 square feet, correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, I would hear a motion.
Mr. Chair, regarding 187, 189 Hillside Avenue, which is zone R5, I move to approve with the following modifications: petition of Kevin Crusaden Esquire for coastal site plan review to construct and renovate an existing two-family dwelling at map 59, block 795, parcel 69, of which Sachin Anand is the owner. Proposed conditions of approval regarding this application concern the city engineer's report to city planner dated 1/31/24, items A through E, I would submit should be met.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I would please call the roll, Beg.
Mr. Agnesi,
With the motion.
Mr. Ulling,
With the motion.
Mr. Anderson,
I'm with the motion.
Mr. Hirsch,
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian,
With the motion.
Mr. Machio,
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer,
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi,
With the motion,
and Chairman Quish.
I'm also with the motion. Next order of business is 104 Edgewater Place, our Zone 12.5 petition of Kevin Crusaden Esquire for a coastal site plan review to construct a single-family dwelling on map 45, block 513, parcel 39, of which Brenton C. Arts is the owner. David, I understand we have a intervener request. Would you please present that?
In accordance with Connecticut General Statutes 22A-19, Christopher McKenna of 24 Rose Street has asserted his right to intervene. The city attorney's office and myself have reviewed the petition and determined that the intervener is properly before the board for the purpose of raising claimed environmental issues. As such, the intervener is authorized to participate in the proceedings as a party, and he can have a seat on the other side of the room there if you'd like.
Okay, so...
Okay, let me finish. I'm not done yet.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Pursuant to 22A-18, the Planning and Zoning Board's scope of review is to determine whether, 1, the proposed activity will or is reasonably likely to cause unreasonable pollution of the state's air, water, or other natural resources, and 2, there are prudent and feasible alternatives to the proposed activity in order to protect the state's resources. In the process this evening, the intervener can make his case regarding numbers 1 and 2 above, as just mentioned. The applicant can rebut the intervener. The board can ask questions of both parties. Once both parties have stated their case regarding the intervention, the board will need to determine if the intervener has made a valid claim that the proposed activity will or is reasonably likely to cause unreasonable pollution of the state's air, water, or other natural resources, and there are prudent and feasible alternatives to the proposed activity in order to protect the state's resources. And once you make that determination, you'll then vote on that, whether or not it's a valid submission or not.
Thank you. So first thing is the intervener.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, may I just talk about the verified pleading that was filed briefly, just to put something on the record?
I'm sorry, say that again?
May I talk about the verified pleading that was filed briefly, just to put it on the record? I disagree that it's properly before the board in the first place.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, it'll just take a minute. I appreciate
okay.
your time. So a verified pleading has been filed by Mr. McKenna through Attorney Green for an environmental intervention. Mr. Sulcas has reviewed the standards for that. The verified pleading that was filed, it's our position, is not properly before the board because the verified pleading doesn't allege any specific environmental harm. If you look at paragraphs 4 and 5 of the verified pleading, it's just a recitation of the statutory language of the CAM Act. So there's specific case law that says mere recitation of...
Actually, I really don't want you to go into that argument now. If you just wanted to say that you're accepting it, that's fine. The first step will be to listen to the intervener, and then you'll have a chance to say whatever you want.
Okay, but just for the record, we object that it's...
Okay, that's good enough. Yeah.
Okay?
That's fine. Understood.
All right.
It's on the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
The intervener has the floor. You're welcome to go to the mic, or you're welcome to sit where you are.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, that's actually better because that mic goes through the system. That one doesn't. I like this one better.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, staff. My name is Joel Green. I practice law in Bridgeport with the law offices of Green and Gross. It's my pleasure to appear before you this evening on behalf of Chris McKenna of 24 Rose Street. As the commission has noted, we have submitted a verified notice of intervention. And I also want to reference my letter to the commission of January 16th, as well as my letter that I had written to counsel for the applicant and the issue on the conduct of the hearing in terms of conducting a public hearing on the application. I'm happy to present on the intervention at this point, and maybe I can address the commission later on the substance of my letter to Attorney Kersaden. But for the moment, on the issue of the intervention, what I would like to do is just briefly review the petition. Largely, our argument is set forth in my letter to the board and through you, Mr. Chairman, beginning on page 4 of the letter, and I don't know whether all the members of the board have a copy. But significantly, all of the elements of this application are intertwined. And what that means is that we are claiming environmental harm by virtue of the proposed development of these sites. As the commission is aware, this involves the combination of 5 narrow strips of land that are proposed to be consolidated for a residential building lot. As I argued in my letter to the board, that combined consolidated lot does not meet the standards of the zoning regulations of the city of Milford as a residential building lot. The Coastal Area Management Act, and just to, in terms of what I've said about it being intertwined, is the Coastal Management Act requires that the proposed project be zoning compliant. And just to take it one step further, our claim is that by virtue of the construction of this home, the home will impair coastal resources by affecting vistas and viewpoints from the public way of the coastal resources being the harbor. So what I'd like to do initially is have my client, Mr. McKenna, testify briefly about the vistas that are provided by these properties that are the subject of the application.
Good evening. Thank you very much for hearing us. My name is Chris McKenna. I live at 24 Rose Street. We've been in Milford in this location for about 15 years. Our backyard abuts Edgewater Place. The front yard is Rose Street, and along Edgewater Place, there's pretty much no houses except for, there's actually one house that's built that we're having some issues with, but it's pretty much raw land. There's a lot of boating activity that goes on down there. The neighbors and myself all walk our dogs. We take walks along there. It's right along the harbor. You could see the harbor. You see the boats going back and forth. It's very nice in the wintertime. It's quiet. And in the summertime, there's a lot of activity. You can see boats and things. It's a beautiful spot. And if houses are allowed to be built here, we're going to be putting about maybe 10 to 12 houses if we're allowed to, there's about 60 10-foot strips that are down there. And if we continue to allow this, the whole street's going to be filled with these houses on lots that I don't believe are legal. So.
Thank you. I just said thank you for that. Neaton, we're going to let them finish first, and then you can ask the question, please. Thank you. And again, please sort of keep your focus on the status of intervener.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, Mr. McKenna, if you could just briefly comment. For example, there is presently a structure on the adjoining property at 94 Edgewater Place, and can you just, for the record, highlight how that structure immediately next door, and similarly a structure is proposed, a residential structure is proposed at 104. Can you just, for the record, highlight how the structure at 94 Edgewater Place impacts on the view both from Edgewater Place, where you and your neighbors have an opportunity to walk and traverse, and also from your property? And can you tell first of all, can you tell the board where your property that you reside at is in relation to?
Again, excuse me, I hate to interrupt what you're trying to do here, but the view is really not an issue with your intervener status. I don't see that as being germane. And just trying to keep it specific to what our job is here tonight, and that is to analyze the legal argument to the best of our abilities on whether the intervener status is, or if that burden has been met.
So just to go to the chairman's point, the fact is that the visual quality of scenic vistas are contemplated in the Coastal Area Management Act at Connecticut General Statute Section 22A-93, paragraph 17. So impacts on coastal vistas and viewpoints are specifically protected under the Coastal Management Act. So
Is that individual or the general public?
well, it is generally views from the public way, and that's why I was asking Mr. McKenna about when he walks on Edgewater Place, the impact of the existing home, the home that's there right now, and what the impact would be of the proposed home. So it is the impact on the general public, you are correct, but the significant point is that those vistas and viewpoints are specifically contemplated by the Act. So that does come within the jurisdiction of the board, and this board must make a finding that those elements are not impacted in order to find that the project is compliant with the Coastal Area Management Act. So,
I understand your point. Okay.
and I understand that, and if the chairman is willing, there are, I know, other members of the public here who live.
Yeah, that's not going to happen tonight. There will be a public hearing at our next meeting to allow other things outside of your intervenor status.
Oh, so is it?
This will be continued, and there will be a public hearing on the CAM next meeting.
Okay.
So, so if you sort of focus on just the intervenor status, other things may very well be better addressed at the next meeting.
Okay, well, with the understanding then, and obviously, that's significant. So it is the position of the commission that, I'm sorry, of the board, that this will be, the CAM application will be the subject of a public hearing.
Correct.
All right, well, with that understanding, and with the understanding that my client and I, as counsel, as a member of the public, will have an opportunity to address the elements of the CAM application itself, then I'll rest.
Fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Plaintiff. Applicant.
I'll be the plaintiff, that's right. For the record, again, Kevin Kersaden. So the purpose of the 22A-19 is to focus on environmental issues. I have not heard any environmental issues claimed. Like I had said at the beginning when I was talking about why the petition was not properly filed, is that they're just referencing, these are arguments against the Coastal Site Plan Act. So I think for the record, I will have our engineer talk about the lack of any environmental harm based on this project, just to put it in there for the commission to consider. And then just very briefly, I understand the chairman would like to have a public hearing. He's made that representation. For the record, I just need to put it into the record. It should not be a public hearing for the following reasons. There's a uniformity requirement by the Connecticut state statutes under CGS 8-2. If you take a property in the R12-5 zone that requires a coastal site plan application and you require that that property has to have a public hearing as part of the coastal site plan application, but you don't require that other properties similarly situated, that's a violation of the uniformity requirements of the statute. Also, the only reason that this project is in front of the board in the first place is because single-family homes are usually exempt from the CAM Act. But if you're within 100 feet of the coastal resource, you have to get the stricter scrutiny of the board and come before the board for a site plan. So the stricter scrutiny is already being applied by the coastal site plan application itself. Thirdly, only the Zoning Board of Appeals can vary the zoning regulations. So what you're doing by granting a public hearing in this instance is you're varying your own regulations, which is only under the jurisdiction of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So thank you I understand you made the decision, but I wanted to put it on the record why that should not be a public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, may I be heard on that point?
Yep.
The Coastal Area Management Act specifically provides that the board may conduct a public hearing on any CAM application, and I don't have the section at my fingertips, but I can in a moment, and I did cite that in my letter to Attorney Kersaden that I copied that I provided a copy to, and I can come up with that section if the chair would like in a moment.
Thank you.
I don't want to belabor it much. I just want to point out that what the board should do, if they want to require public hearings for coastal site plan applications, you have a similar regulation when there's a protest of a zone change where you require 20% of the people within the 500 feet of the property. So what that statute allows is the board to put in their regulations allowing for a public hearing for a site plan.
I understand there's different readings of the same language, which is very common in your trade. So at any rate, the application for intervenor he has rested, so it'll be up to us to vote on that. Or are you withdrawing your intervenor status?
I'm happy, I don't need to be an intervener. If there's going to be a public hearing, then I won't put the board to the burden of considering our petition. I'll withdraw the petition as long as there's an understanding that we can be heard at a public hearing.
Okay. Okay, so yep, go ahead. Yep.
If I might, traditionally, if we've had issues regarding an area that we would not otherwise have a public hearing, we made a motion to go into public hearing. What most serves my memory is the project around the green, and we did go into a public hearing, but I'm not agreeing that we should have a public hearing on this CAM application. I think that we would need a motion to get to a public hearing.
For the record, Jimmy, I agree with Bob Sadi.
Okay, David, is that your understanding as well? I thought the chair had the ability to do that, but correct me if I'm wrong.
My understanding is that you have the ability to do that. If you want consensus, that's your choice. So if you want to have the public hearing, you can. If you want consensus among the board and take a vote, you can. But I would suggest that if you decide to take a vote of the board, you vote first on the intervener, because the statement was made that as long as there's a public hearing, they won't withdraw. So if by some chance the vote goes against a public hearing, then you would then have the intervener still active. So I would vote on the intervener and then take a vote if you so choose. That's your choice.
Yeah, so do we have any other comments? I would open up to the board for discussion. Again, my point is that we have a situation that is different than every other CAM, in that we have lots that may or may not be compliant, and that argument will not have the ability to be made effectively unless there is a public hearing. If it's just a CAM, that won't happen because there will be no input. Now, the intervener has limited input based on the statute, and again, we would, as a board, collectively decide on the relevance of what they are presenting. But we have a number of issues that make this different than every other CAM. It's not 12,500 square feet. This area was intended to be docks, so there's certain, I think, relevance to the history of Belford, what it was meant, what it was designed, and I think we won't hear it, or we won't hear, a number of different perspectives and possibly arguments that would convince us one way or the other, unless we have the opportunity to hear it with a public hearing. Etan.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, from what you just said, are you saying that these are not legal or valid building lots?
There is an argument that says that, and so it's, again, like many things in the law, there are two sides. Someone will say that, yes, it is, and will be when it's all combined, or it's already combined by virtue of merger by law. It will be less than 12,500 square feet, which some may argue makes it not appropriate to even have a CAM application. So there's differences of opinion. Yep.
May I ask a question to Attorney Green?
Again, if it's directed towards the health and safety issue, yes. If not, then I would say no. Then we should wait for a public hearing, and then we get to hear sort of a legal argument, which we're not really permitted to hear, in my mind, at this.
Yeah, but I think you just opened the door to a legal argument when you said that you think that perhaps these are not legal building lots. You are indicating a legal argument. You just presented a legal
from the
question.
board, because I could give my opinion as a member of the board, having read what I read.
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, the section of the general statutes is 22A109 under coastal site.
No, we're not doing that. We're not doing that here. We're not going back and forth here. Either you're as an intervener, or and we're not sure whether we're allowing you to sit or we're going to have a public hearing. If we're not going to have a public hearing, then we'll let you continue as intervener. But the board has to decide that first, please.
And I just, the statute.
But I don't want you to weigh in on that. I want them to make their own decisions.
But it's up to the board, is this what the statute says?
It's up to the board.
To hold a public hearing or not on a closed.
Well, David said it's up to me, but I'm going to obviously listen to what the board has to say and weigh, and let that weigh in. So if there's any other questions or comments from the board, Brian?
I just wanted you to know that I would support a public hearing. I support your position.
Thank you.
Mr. Quish, I support your position for a public hearing.
Okay, so let's hear a motion. I'll move to have a public hearing at the next meeting. Do I have a second? Second. Any discussion on the motion?
Mr.
Seeing
Chair,
none, Meg, call the roll, please.
Can I, who was the
I'm sorry,
second?
go ahead.
Who was the second, please?
Mr. Chair, do you want to vote on the intervener status before you take a vote?
No, I don't, because if it fails, then I want to give the intervener more time.
Okay.
Ready to vote? Okay. Mr. Agnesi?
With
the motion.
Excuse me, please.
There's discussion, we have a,
Okay, we either need someone to, I need someone to repeat the motion, please. We've got 10 people here, I don't think we know what we're talking about.
Okay,
So
no, I
if somebody
think-
could repeat it, I'd appreciate it.
no, I agree with you. So the motion was to carry this over to the next scheduled meeting and have this application have a public hearing. And I'm not wording it that well, but that's the intent. And we have a second, and so we have discussion on the motion. If none, then we'll go to vote.
Can I just have a confirmation on the second, please?
Confirmation on the second? Confirm.
Thank you. Mr. Agnesi?
With the motion.
Mr. Allen?
With the motion.
Mr. Anderson?
With the motion?
Mr. Hirsch?
With the motion.
Mr. Kalijian?
Against the motion.
Mr. Machio?
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer?
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi?
Against the motion?
And Chairman Quish.
I'm with the motion. So we will have a public hearing.
I'll withdraw the petition to.
And so the petition for intervenor status has been withdrawn. We don't need to vote on that. And the applicant has an opportunity, a choice, whether to present their CAM application tonight or save it for next week. Not next week, but the next meeting.
Well, I think it should be done under the public hearing. I mean, the public hearing hasn't been noticed for tonight for this case.
It has been.
It is a public hearing?
No, it hasn't been noticed tonight. It'll be noticed for the next meeting.
Right, it'll be except for the next meeting. Yes, I'm
Right.
sorry.
That's okay, yeah. So I think that we need to wait until the public hearing's open.
That's fine. It's
Yeah.
perfectly your choice either way.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are postponing that. Next order of business, public hearings closed by April 11th, 2024, vote by May 16th. Proposed regulation change 23-14, petition of Sarah Sharp Esquire for change to the Milford zoning regulations, Article 5, Section 514, Figure 4, minimum off-street parking requirements. Applicant has the floor.
Good evening, Commissioners. Oops. For the record, my name is Sarah Sharp. I'm a land use attorney with offices at 135 Broad Street in Milford.
Attorney
There should be
Sharp.
more
Yes,
coming.
if you could make sure you keep close to the microphone, we do have or if you didn't, that microphone works over there if you
Okay.
want to sit and talk, but you're
Okay.
fine wherever you are.
All right, let's see how it goes. So I'm here on behalf of the applicants 1455 BPR LLC and Raising Cane's Restaurants LLC with a petition to amend 5.14 Figure 4 to create a new parking category specific to fast food restaurants.
I can't fucking hear.
Oh, let me move to the other one. Is that better? Okay. How about now? Oh, good. Okay. For those of you who aren't familiar with Raising Cane's, it's a fast food restaurant that specializes in fried chicken fingers. They're based out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and they make, hand-battered, made-to-order, cooked-to-order chicken fingers. So this proposed regulation amendment is the first step towards bringing this restaurant to Milford. It's been a really popular, growing chain across the country. Slide 1, please. The next slide. Thank you. So we started looking at this project last summer, and the one thing that we immediately saw, and I was surprised to see, is that you do have a defined term for fast food restaurants, but there's no parking standard associated with that use. We met with David Sulkus early on and discussed that, and he had informed us that usually for fast food, you have to comply with the general restaurant parking standard. And he also mentioned that the 2032 POCD, which was still in draft at that time, recommended some updates to the parking standards. Next slide, please. So we had that discussion and we looked really carefully at the existing standards, and we also surveyed some, the other towns in Connecticut to see what they do with fast food restaurants. And what became apparent really quickly is that the gross floor area measurement for restaurants that we have to apply here, it really results in too much parking, especially for fast food uses where people are mostly using the drive-through or takeout, and there's a lot of turnover. So, we've seen that in our everyday lives. It's common sense. People are just not eating in as much anymore. You're doing takeout, and we wanted to craft a parking standard that would reflect that so that we can have, less impervious surfaces overall, keep more green space as we can, and knowing that this is a parking standard that needs to work not just for Raising Cane, but for other fast food type uses. I just did a quick survey on Google Earth. Next slide, please. To see some of the nearby, popular fast food type restaurants and what their parking fields look like, because you can go back in history on Google Earth. And this first one is the Panera Bread on Post Road. It has a drive-through. It's open 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days a week. We know it's popular, it's well frequented, and you can see that in the snapshots, there's about 30 to 50% of the parking fields unused. Next slide, please. And this is the Chipotle down the street as well. Again, another popular fast food type restaurant. It has a huge parking field and a lot of empty spaces. And while this is just a snapshot, it does support what we suspected, which is that the parking regulations aren't really fitted with what the needs are for fast food. Next slide. So in looking at other towns, we saw that Milford standards are really conservative for fast food. Many towns use a patron floor area for the basis of their parking on restaurant uses. That means that you exclude all non-patron areas. Anything that's back of house, mechanical storage is excluded. And for those towns that didn't use patron area, we still saw that they had a parking standard that didn't require as much parking as what Milford does for a fast food type use. There was a more lenient standard to reflect, the parking needs of fast food. And we took all that information and we came up with some solutions, and we had a Zoom with your planning director, Joe Griffith, and your planner, David Sulkus. They were really generous with their time. And we showed them our options, and we all came to a solution that we think really works for the town and works for everybody. Next slide, please. So here highlighted is the proposed standard. It's one space for each 150 square feet of interior floor area, excluding restrooms and storage areas. We discussed going with a patron floor area approach, but we ultimately decided not to do that because this was more consistent with your existing regulations. It kept it simple. You don't have a patron floor area definition now, so we would have had to add that. And the other concern that can come up is patron floor area excludes everything back of house, so you don't know if you're parking for employees, whereas this parking standard looks at the whole interior floor area, you know, employee and patron, but it excludes areas that you just don't need to park for: storage rooms, freezers, restrooms, things that don't generate additional need for parking, but can be really large, especially when you talk about ADA bathrooms and large freezers. Next slide, please. So just as a preview, if this amendment is granted, we will be returning to P&Z in the coming months to apply for a special permit at 1455 Boston Post Road. It's next door to Taco Bell and across from Boston Market. We think it's really well suited, and so that's sort of what we're looking to in the future. But we really tried to partner with the city on this because it's something that you guys are working towards in improving your parking standards anyway, and I think this really fills a gap that you needed filled, and it will be really useful as a tool moving forward. Next slide, please. So just putting the amendment back up in case there are any questions. This proposal is consistent with the 2032 POCD, which has now been adopted, and it has received a favorable staff review from Mr. David Sulkis. And like I've given you all the background so you know how much thought we've put into this, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I appreciate your time and appreciate the time of your staff as always.
Thank you. You were very clear sounding as well as your thought process. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
David?
The applicant is proposing an amendment to the parking regulations to create a specific parking category for fast food restaurants. The proposed parking standard would require one space per each 150 square feet, excluding restrooms,
many employees would typically be on duty at any given time?
I believe it varies based on the maximum shift. It may be between 9 and 16, but most of them take the public transit, and we are right on a bus stop. So we do find, and consistent with other fast food restaurants in the area, there aren't a lot of staff parking in those lots. And that is what we see in our stores as well.
Thank you. Yep.
I have a question. How do you get the food trucks there? Is this the top right where you'll be unloading and loading based off this?
So this is just a concept, representational illustration. When we come for the special permit, you're gonna have fully engineered drawings, truck turning radiuses, all of that good stuff. The fire department will have signed off, so I kind of wanna avoid getting into that because we just aren't there yet, and I don't wanna mix things up.
No problem. I thought this was like the final.
No. You'll have a really fulsome ability to review once we get to that stage.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Zadi.
Thank you, Chairman Quish. I just have a comment. I understand it's a very good presentation. I am concerned with the issue that is a little bit different in my view of what the POCD did was we understand in residential areas we can get less cars. Here we want to have more cars because we want to use the drive-through. And not having enough parking spaces in this particular location is not problematic, but I can think of several areas in our district, Mr. Chair, where they're using the side roads because there's not enough parking to deal with the drive-through and the people that are coming in and those that are seated. I'm just thinking that maybe this needs a little bit more review, comparison to the other cities and towns around us. And I think that we should see if there are any standards regarding that. But just my thoughts. Thank you.
Mr. Hirsch.
I echo Mr. Sadi's sentiment, which is one of the issues in the POCD is keeping cars off the roads. So when you reduce parking capacity by 50%, I'm not saying you're going to end up with a situation where you're going to have cars parking on a road, but you increase the risk of that. And I don't know if we've fully vetted out the risk of additional cars parking on our city streets.
I think that's a good point. I do think, though, that there's sort of separate issues. The design element of the drive-through and how many cars can get in queue, I think, speaks more to whether there'll be a problem, in getting in and out. If people are parking and have entrance and exit different than the drive-through area, then parking is sort of one circumstance that will affect the neighborhood and the actual drive-through would affect another. I do think that the market will take care of it in a sense that if it's too long to wait in line, they're going to go somewhere else. And if there's no place to park, they'll go somewhere else. And they've obviously spent money here and they're going to spend a lot more. So I think that they're probably thought it through fairly well. Yes, Etan.
Yes, but Mr. Quish, you're focusing just on this potential future application. What the zone change is into perpetuity. So it's not just this site I'm referring to, it's any future sites that may be sites of fast food restaurants.
Right, so when it comes to our special permit to look at it, I think at that point we have to be able to make a determination whether the traffic flow and the parking flow. I mean, I don't know if that's our standard purview, Mr. Solkis, when we look at this final application or future applications, will we be able to make some accommodations for what we think is best for the neighborhoods?
It's a standard in the regulation. So if they meet the standard, they meet the standard. What your regulations allow you to do is actually the opposite, which is if there is a case where they're sharing parking with someone else, you could reduce the required parking. You have that in your regulations. But if our regulations say that they only need to provide 150, one space per 150, and they come in with a zoning compliant plan, you cannot then say it's not zoning compliant because we don't like it.
Right, but I guess my other question would then be, if we don't have a problem with how it's parked, but we do have a problem with how the parking interfaces with the drive-through, what is our ability to, work with them and say, no, you either have to add more parking or another curb cut or something to make it flow? Will we have that capacity to weigh in?
So our regulations do specify the number of queuing spaces both before the window and after the window. So that's, you need to know that. So this current plan, and again, it's only a proposed plan that it hasn't been fully cooked. It appears to me that there, and this might not be 2 waiting spaces after the window. Our regulations would probably say, I believe, do say that they would have to have that. So something like that, you could go, oh, there's only 1 here. No, you can't have it. Unless the applicant, before they came here, went to the Zoning Board of Appeals to have that regulation varied.
Understood, thank you. And, go ahead.
Just very briefly, for your question about looking at off-site impacts or, street parking, I do think that, to my knowledge, the fast food with drive-through or fast food restaurants are special permit uses, and in your special permit review, you do have the ability to look at off-site traffic impacts if it looks like people are going to be parking on the surrounding streets. I think that would be within your purview to look at as part of traffic impacts in a special permit application. I also just I do have some more specifics on the parking requirements in East Haven and Branford. So right now, your parking requirement for all restaurants is 1 space per 70 square feet gross floor area, and that applies to any type of restaurant, fast food, or otherwise. In East Haven, they require 2 spaces per 75 square feet of patron floor area, meaning you're only counting the area where patrons are sitting. So it's a much reduced area, whereas the gross floor area that we have in Milford is requiring any kitchen space, any storage, mechanical rooms, all of that. In Branford, they require 1 space per 75 square feet of patron floor area. So it's a comparable to Milford's 1 per 75, but where Milford says gross floor area, Branford says patron floor area, which necessarily means you're looking at a much smaller amount of square footage and it's much less parking. So just to emphasize the research that we did in finding that Milford's regulations are very conservative, and we're not changing the general standard for all restaurants and coffee houses and everything that's listed there. This is just specifically for fast food restaurants that meet the definition of fast food restaurants as it's defined in your regulations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? This is a public hearing, so if anybody from the public would like to speak, please come up to the podium. State your name and address. Keep your comments to 3 minutes. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. Public hearing is closed, and I would hear a motion.
I move to approve as presented the petition of Sarah Sharp Esquire for a change to Milford zoning regulations, Article 5, Section 5.1.4, Figure 4, minimum off-street parking requirements, effective date February 23rd, 2024.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
John, thank you. Any discussion of the motion? Etan?
If we do grant this motion, we will have to pay close attention in the future if this issue arises to the traffic studies that are presented. And we may need multiple traffic studies to be done in the future per application because of the 2032 POCD. I think because of the public policy that's been established in terms of getting cars off the roadway, we may need multiple studies per special site plan review going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Sadie?
Thank you very much. Regarding the motion, I would not be voting in favor of this. I voiced my comments earlier that we should be continuing this. We understand we're not continuing this. I have serious concerns that it's really opening up a very dangerous Pandora's box. In our district, the 3rd district, there's areas where they are parking on the city's streets because there's not enough parking, and these would be what I understand to be the fast food restaurant as defined. So I just don't think it's a good idea at this point, but that being said, I will be voting in opposition to this particular motion.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Also, for the record, I think the idea is not fully baked. I'm not clear on this figure as being the correct figure, 75 feet of gross floor area. I think it requires more discussion, so I might be voting.
Well, it's 150.
150.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
It's all right. I mean, we talked about a lot of numbers.
yes.
I personally think it's been studied and worked on with both with David and with Joe. I think they're land use professionals. I think this is a company is putting a lot of money into it. I think they're probably know what they're doing. If it was a bad idea, their business would fail, and I don't think that that's a reason why we should approve it. I happen to think that it makes sense. I think our counterparts in the Southern Connecticut area are doing similar things, and I think that the POCD doesn't specifically say we should change fast food restaurants, but we are, and we did discuss changing restaurants in general, and there is actually a state push to redo what we find now is a lot of areas are overparked, and we saw, visual proof of that with, anecdotal, 3 or 4 years in a row of a Chipotle, and a lot of people sit and eat at Chipotle, probably a lot more than this particular restaurant, and most fast food restaurants in general are drive-through, takeout. So I think it's a good plan. I think it's a good location, and I fully support it. Mr. Hirsch?
I think that Mr. Setti also makes a good point, which is in his area, and given the broad definition of fast food restaurant in the regulation, and I'll just define it so everybody can hear it. I don't know if everybody read it, but fast food restaurant in our regulations is defined as, quote, restaurants where most customers order and are served their food at a counter or in a motor vehicle and packages prepared to leave the premises or able to be taken to a table or counter to be consumed. That's more than just Chipotle, Burger King. That could be 90% of the restaurants in Milford under that definition, and a lot of small businesses.
Well, I think that wait service is most of the restaurants. You have a waiter or waitress, come in and take your order and bring it to your table. So that's the difference. Yeah.
All right. So, what is the definition of most? Because the regulation says most customers. Is that more than 50%? Is that
50.001?
Kind of like the coin toss at the Super Bowl.
I guess, yeah.
Again, given that broad definition in our regulations, I think this could apply to so many restaurants.
I mean, you make a good point. I think really where the error is in our definition of a fast food restaurant. So anyway, we'll have a vote, and everyone can vote their conscience. And if there's more discussion, I'm willing to discuss it. If not, let's go to vote. We do have a motion, and we have a second. Is that correct? Okay. If there's no more discussion, please call the roll.
Mr. Agnesi.
With the motion.
Mr. Ollie.
With the motion.
Mr. Anderson.
Against the motion.
Mr. Hirsch.
Against the motion.
Mr. Collegian.
I'm with the motion.
Mr. Machio.
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer.
I am against the motion.
Mr. Sadi,
Against the motion.
and Chairman Quish.
I'm with the motion.
The motion failed.
5-5.
Yeah, 1, 2, no, it's not. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You need, because this is a regulation change, you need 6 people to vote, and you only, in favor of it, you only have 5, so the motion failed.
Okay, I would thank you for your time and effort, and I would encourage you to rethink it. I would welcome you into Milford, and hopefully we'll have a full board, and maybe if you make some minor adjustments, you might convince some of these naysayers that it might be good for Milford. But thank you for your time. Okay, that is done. Next order of business, proposed regulation change 23-5, petition of the Planning and Zoning Board for a change to Milford zoning regulations, Article 5, flood hazard and flood damage prevention regulations, Section 5.8.13.4, elevated buildings. David, are you going to be the one who presents that to us?
I could.
Or no one will.
Yeah, okay, I guess it'll be me. Okay, so basically, we are changing some language under 5.8.13.4 to make it consistent with other flood language that's in the book. So we talk about design flood elevation and other regulations, where this one talks about base flood elevation. So that is being made consistent with the rest of the book. We talk about a little more details in the plans providing, showing where parking and storage and access to the buildings are, and reiterating where, prohibiting habitable floor area, on the ground floor. So those those changes are all in the proposed text to you. So it's literally 10 words that are being added and corrected from what we currently have.
Any questions or comments from the board?
And this, by the way, just to let you know, only affects AE and AE zones, A and AE zones.
Okay. This is a public hearing. If there's anyone who'd like to speak to it, please come in the door. Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. And I would hear a question from Mr. Sadi.
Thank you. This proposed regulation change 23.5, I move to approve as presented the petition of the Planning and Zoning Board for a change to the Milford zoning regulations, Article 5, flood hazard and flood damage prevention regulations, Section 5.8.13.4, elevated buildings, effective date February 23rd of 2024. Thank you.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Mr. Anderson.
I think it's a good change. I'm just wondering when it would take effect if it were passed.
That was part of the motion, February 23rd.
Thank you.
Okay. Without further comment, Meg, please call the roll.
Mr. Agnesi,
With the motion.
Mr. Alling,
With the motion.
Mr. Anderson,
With motion.
Mr. Hirsch,
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian,
With the motion.
Mr. Machio,
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer,
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi,
With the motion.
and Chairman Quish.
I'm with the motion. Next order of business, proposed regulation change 23.8, petition of the Planning and Zoning Board for a change to Milford zoning regulations, Article 9, Section 9.2, for approval of location, and Section 5.4.1, commercial garage and service station regulations. David, if you would let us know what this is about.
Sure. So the state legislature had, for years, wanted what's called a certificate of approval of location for a service station, a garage, a dealership, anything having to do with automotive uses. So even if the Planning and Zoning Board approved one, then they would still need the certificate of approval of location. The legislature, over the years, kept flipping it back and forth between your board and the Zoning Board of Appeals. And finally, they realized with some lobbying that, well, you know, if the municipality is already approving this, then, there doesn't need to be someone else saying, oh, it's okay, because you've already said it's okay, whether it's one body in the municipality or the other. So they fixed the legislation, the statutes, and the ability to create the certificate of approval of location is now with the zoning enforcement officer. So obviously, someone comes to you, gets approval, he's going to issue a zoning permit and a certificate of approval of location.
Understood. Any questions? This is a public hearing. If anyone would like to speak to it, please come up. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We have a motion. John?
I move to approve as presented the petition of the Planning and Zoning Board for a change to Milford zoning regulations, Article 9, Section 9.2.4, approval of location, and Section 5.4.1, commercial garage and service station regulations, effective date February 23rd, 2024.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Meg, please call the roll.
Mr. Agnesi?
With the motion.
Mr. Allen?
With the motion.
Mr. Anderson?
With the motion.
Mr. Hirsch?
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian?
With the motion.
Mr. Macchio?
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer?
With the motion.
Mr. Sadi?
With the motion.
And Chairman Frisch.
I'm also with the motion. Thank you. There's no old business. We have liaison report. David?
What we have under subcommittee.
No, liaison report.
Liaison.
You attended
Oh, that's
our
right.
SCROG meeting.
And I believe I seconded the nomination of Mr. Sadi to become the secretary of the Regional Planning Agency. So congratulations, Mr. Sadi, because they voted for you.
Thank you.
Nicely done.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And so that's the liaison report. Subcommittee, we do want to circulate a couple of things. David, if you'd like to walk us through these two.
Yes. Okay. So we have two proposed regulation changes that we would like to circulate. The first one is related to group homes because we need to do a slight tweak to our regulations to make them compliant with state statutes. There was a change in state statutes, and that is what we're calling Amendment 24-1, which is literally like 3 words, and I can go into it more. I can put it on the screen if you want to see it, but it's basically we have to allow certain group homes as a matter of right, which we do currently, but we just have to extend it to one more type of group home by statute.
So making our regulations compliant with state law.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the next one?
Another one where we need to become compliant with state law. This has to do with the amount of parking that we can require for multifamily dwelling units. Our regulations are slightly call for parking that is in excess of what state statutes now will allow. The statutes put a limit on what we can ask people to provide for parking for multifamily dwelling units. So this change is just to bring our regulations, our parking, into compliance with state statutes.
Okay. So any questions or comments from the board? Go ahead, Mr. Sadi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Sulkus, because we did discuss this in the Regulation Subcommittee. This is because of a statute that passed in the last session and applies only to specific residential areas. I think you said multifamily houses, but that's the reason we have to change it, because the statute was changed.
That is correct.
Not for all off-street parking, it's just for this type of off-street.
This has to do with in our regulations, what we call multiple family dwellings. So that's when you get typically one of these larger projects that's either in downtown or in other parts of the city that are multi-unit, where we have efficiency, units, one-bedroom units, two-bedroom units, three-bedroom units.
Thank you. And the last thing, Mr. Chair, could you just explain to the new members of the board of the process what we're doing? And I think the chair used the term circulation, but could you explain that to the new
Sure.
members of the board, please?
So when we have regulation changes that come through either staff or through the Regulation Subcommittee, once they're presented to this board, we approve that they get circulated, and that is that we send this information out to the Regional Planning Board and our neighboring towns, I believe, and they get a chance to weigh in. If they feel it somehow harms them, they can object to it. It normally comes just back to us, either with no comment, which means they don't have a problem with it, or they send something back that is approved by them. Then we put it on the agenda for a future meeting, and that will be a public hearing, similar to what we had tonight with these things. We actually have a public hearing, and the public can speak, and often they do, and then we'll make a vote on that, and it will be a higher level of more than just a majority. What's the threshold for a reg change again?
6 members.
6, no matter how many are present, 6, no matter how many are seated.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So if there's any questions on that procedure, you can always reach out to David or to me, and it was pretty straightforward. But so for this, we won't do a roll call. We'll just, all those in favor of circulating this, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, it's approved. We have approval of the minutes for 1/2/24. We have a motion.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of January 2nd.
Motion second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none. Chair's report. I just want to welcome John back to the board and thank everybody for their time. And staff report.
None this evening.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn. Our work this day is done. Thank you.